The crown chooses its bearer.
Some choices invite ruin, and some ensure justice.
The crown was still warm from my head when he placed it on hers, and when he turned to me, his wife, his queen, and said, "You will serve her," I understood something no one in that throne room did. He had not broken me. He had just shown me exactly where to aim. The throne room had never been so quiet. 400 people and not one breath, not one whisper, just the sound of Romeo's hands lifting the crown from my head, slowly, the way you remove something sacred, and the soft, devastating click of gold settling onto Tara's dark hair. I did not flinch. I had trained myself in the 3 seconds between his hands leaving my head and the court's collective exhale to become stone, to become nothing, to give them no moment they could carry back to their dinner tables and describe as the look on her face when she broke. They would not have that. Romeo turned to me. His eyes, those eyes I had trusted with everything, held no apology, no guilt, just a decision already made, already finished, already buried. "You will serve my Luna," he said, loud enough for every lord, every elder, every wolf in that hall to hear. "You will attend to her needs. You will remember your place." My place. The chain was cold when they locked it around my wrists, heavy, heavier than I expected, as though it had been chosen carefully for that weight, for that specific humiliation. I heard Tara exhale beside the throne, not a sigh, something quieter, something almost like satisfaction. I kept my eyes down. They led me to the kitchens. They handed me a tray, and when I carried it back into that hall, into the hall where my portrait still hung on the eastern wall, and placed it before the woman wearing my crown, I did not spill a single drop. Romeo watched. I felt his gaze the entire walk, measuring, waiting, perhaps, for tears, for trembling, for the collapse he had decided I deserved. He saw nothing. I turned to leave. "Make sure it's hotter next time." Tara's voice, light, casual, the voice of a woman who had already forgotten I was ever dangerous. My hand tightened around the tray's edge, once, just once, the metal biting into my palm. Then I released it. Count, I told myself, just keep counting, because I had already started. They took my bedroom first, then my wardrobe, then my seat at the council table, my chair at the dining hall, my name in the mouths of every servant who had once said it like a prayer. All of it, stripped away so quietly, so efficiently, that by the 3rd morning I wondered if I had imagined being queen at all. I rose before dawn now. That was the rule. No one stated it, no one had to. I simply understood that the palace I once ruled ran on a schedule that no longer included me as anything but labor. Tara's chambers needed warming before she woke. Her bath needed drawing. Her breakfast tray, silver, the same silver I had eaten from for 6 years, needed arranging with the precision of someone who feared the consequences of getting it wrong. I was not afraid, but I was watching. The court gathered for the morning meal, and Tara entered wearing a gown I recognized, deep crimson, mine, altered at the waist to fit her smaller frame. She moved through the hall like a woman still learning how power felt in her hands, still testing its edges. "Straighten up," she said as I passed behind her chair, loud enough for the table to hear. "You're slouching. It's embarrassing." I straightened. Lord Aldrich, seated 3 chairs down, a man who had stood at my father's funeral and wept, looked at his plate. No one spoke. That silence told me everything. They were not loyal to Tara. They were afraid of Romeo. There was a difference, and the difference was the only thing keeping me moving through these marble halls without screaming. I carried her empty tray back toward the kitchens. The corridor narrowed, quieted, my footsteps the only sound. Then a hand closed briefly around mine. I almost stopped walking, almost. Old Marta, the chambermaid who had braided my hair on my wedding morning, who had pressed her forehead to my hand and wept, passed me without a word, without a glance, the way ghosts pass each other in a haunted house. But something remained in my palm, a folded cloth, small, pressed tight. I kept walking, kept my face empty, waited until I turned the corner before I opened it. Inside, just a torn corner of a letter, Tara's seal. My blood went cold, because the date on that letter was 3 weeks before my dethroning. I hid the torn corner inside the hem of my servant's dress, stitched shut with a thread I pulled from the mattress. Then I sat on the stone floor of my room, 4 cold walls and a cut narrow enough to remind me every morning what I had lost, and I began to build the map. Not on paper. Paper could be found. Paper could be used against me. I built it in my mind, the way my father had taught me to memorize battle formations when I was 7 years old. Names first, he used to say. Always names first. Everything else is just geography. 3 names. Lord Cassin, who had shifted his seat closer to Tara at the council table 2 months before my fall, before there was any public reason to. Marin, Romeo's personal secretary, who had stopped meeting my eyes 6 weeks before the charges appeared, and someone higher. Someone with enough access to place forged documents into the council's sealed record room without a single guard raising the alarm. I didn't have that name yet, but I would. I found Marta the next morning in the east corridor, her arms full of folded linens, moving with the practiced invisibility of a woman who had survived 4 decades in this palace by never being memorable. I fell into step beside her, said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Who carried the sealed letter to the elder council the night before my trial?" Marta did not break stride, did not look at me, but her eyes moved, just once, just briefly, down the corridor to the left, the servants' passage that ran behind the council chamber, the one the nobles never used because it smelled of tallow and old stone. That look lasted less than a second. It was enough. I waited until nightfall. The passage was dark, and I moved through it slowly, one hand trailing the wall, counting doorways. Then I heard her voice and stopped breathing entirely. "Tara, if you breathe a word of what you saw, I will have you removed so quietly that even your family won't know where to look." A pause, a small frightened sound from someone I couldn't see. Do you understand me? My back pressed flat against the stone. She was afraid. Tara, the woman wearing my crown, sleeping in my bed, drinking from my cups, was afraid, which meant there was something left to find, and she knew it. The servant Tara had threatened in the passage was gone by morning. No explanation, no farewell. One moment she existed inside these walls, and the next her cot was stripped, and her name had already begun to fade from the mouths of those who'd known her. That was how Tara worked, not with spectacle, with erasure. It made my blood run cold. It made me move faster. I had learned her schedule the way you learn a dangerous animal's. Not from watching her directly, but from watching everything around her. The maids who tensed 30 seconds before she entered a room. The guards who straightened with a particular stiffness that meant she was coming. The kitchen staff who began plating her tray earlier than necessary because being late, even once, had consequences none of them would describe out loud. I used that schedule like a key. On the third afternoon, when Romeo rode out to inspect the eastern border, and the palace exhaled the specific relief of a house whose tyrant has briefly left it, I went to Tara's private writing room. I had 4 minutes, maybe 5. The room was immaculate in the way of someone who needed control so badly they imposed it even on furniture. Every surface ordered, every drawer locked, except one, the shallow one beneath the writing desk's lip, the one people always forgot because it had no handle. I found it in 12 seconds. A letter, folded 3 times, the ink slightly older than the paper's crispness suggested. I didn't read it there. I pressed it flat against my forearm beneath my sleeve and walked back to the kitchens at the exact pace of a woman carrying nothing of importance. That night, by a single candle burned low enough that no light crept under the door, I read it. My hands did not shake. I made them not shake. Tara had written to a forger. The letter was dated 4 weeks before my trial, 4 weeks before the evidence appeared, 4 weeks before Romeo had looked at me across the council table with those eyes that had stopped recognizing me. She had built it, all of it. Every lie that had stripped me of my crown had been commissioned like a piece of jewelry, designed, paid for, and delivered on schedule. I folded the letter, pressed it flat, lifted the loose stone in the corner of the floor where the mortar had crumbled away from years of cold and damp. I placed it inside. I replaced the stone. I stood up, and the doorway was no longer empty. Tara stood there, still in her evening gown, a candle in her own hand, her eyes moving from my face to the floor, to my hands, to my face again. The silence lasted 1 second, 2. "What are you doing?" I held up the empty cleaning cloth I had kept in my pocket for exactly this moment. "Cleaning, my Luna." Her eyes dropped to the floor, to the stone, to the thin line of mortar that may or may not have looked recently disturbed. 3 seconds. She stood there for 3 full seconds, and I held my breath behind a face made of marble and years of learning how to hide everything that mattered. Then she turned and left. Her footsteps faded down the corridor, and the only sound left in that room was my heartbeat, loud, furious, very much alive, slamming against my ribs like it was trying to remind me how much I still had to lose. She suspects, I told myself. Good. Suspects is not knows, and knows is the only thing that can stop me now. I had learned in the weeks since my chains that the most dangerous weapon in a palace is not a blade. It is a perfectly timed word placed in the right ear at the exact moment doubt is hungriest. The West Wall Agreement had been Romeo's decision, a trade arrangement with the northern border lords, 3 months in negotiation, signed with ceremony and witnessed by the full Elder Council. Tara had sat beside him at the signing. She had smiled. She had touched his arm at the exact moment the ink dried, the way a woman marks what she considers hers. She had also, clearly, never read a single word of it. I was serving refreshments during a small afternoon gathering when Lord Aldrich mentioned the West Wall grain clause to Lord Fenwick, 2 seats from where Tara stood performing the role of gracious Luna. The secondary clause does protect the eastern settlements, Aldrich said. That was the king's specific intention. Tara turned, smile perfectly in place. Of course, the western settlements have always been Romeo's priority. The smallest silence. Aldrich looked at Fenwick. I kept pouring. I kept my eyes down. I kept my face completely empty, while everything inside me went very, very still. Western. She had said Western in front of 2 elder council members who had personally witnessed Romeo's Eastern Settlement Amendment, who had signed their names beneath it. I moved on before anyone could look at me. That evening at dinner, I carried the wine to the head table. When I reached Romeo's shoulder, I paused, just briefly, and said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "My lord, I noticed Lady Tara seemed uncertain about the West Wall Agreement earlier. I hope she is well." I did not wait for his expression. I did not need it. I moved on, deposited the wine, returned to the kitchen, let the silence do its work. 3 hours later, I was collecting linens from the corridor outside the private sitting room when I heard Romeo's voice through the cracked door. "Tell me about the West Wall Agreement." Casual, quiet, the tone of a man asking something simple. Kara's answer came immediately, too smooth, the answer of someone who had rehearsed every possible question except the ones that mattered. She said Western again. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds, and in that silence I heard Romeo's goblet meet the table, slowly, deliberately, the way a man sets something down when his hands need something to do while his mind catches up with what his ears just told him. There it is, I thought. There is the crack. I moved at midnight. The palace cellar smelled of tallow and cold earth. I had chosen it because no noble had descended those stairs in living memory, because down here, in the bones of the palace that Tara had never thought to control, I still had ground. They came one by one, Marta first, then Lord Aldrich, then Fenwick, then Captain Doran, the man I had personally promoted to head of the inner guard 3 years ago, when I had recognized in him the rarest quality a soldier could possess, loyalty that didn't shift with the political wind. I placed the documents on the table between us, the forged letter, the intercepted correspondence, Marta's written account, staff testimony from servants Tara had quietly removed, but whose words I had recorded the moment I understood what they had seen. I did not make a speech. I let them read. The cellar was so quiet I could hear the torch breathe. Fenwick looked up, then at Aldrich. Not surprise, recognition. I said, "You know what this means. You know what you must do." One by one, they nodded. I climbed back through the palace alone, momentum solid in my chest and entirely mine. I should have had 1 night. I didn't even have 1 hour. 3 corridors from my room I heard it, Tara's voice behind Romeo's chamber door, high and urgent, stripped of every performance. "She is building something against you, against the pack." Papers placed on a surface. "I have proof. She needs to be removed tonight. Exile or something more permanent. Romeo, if you wait, it will be too late." I stopped breathing. She had moved first, which meant Romeo was on the other side of that door right now, holding whatever fabrication Tara had constructed, deciding tonight, in the dark, without a trial, without a counsel, whether I lived or disappeared. Then I heard something that turned my blood to ice. His voice, low, deliberate. "Send for the exile papers." The corridor tilted. I pressed my back against the stone and closed my eyes, and for one terrible moment I felt it, the floor dropping out, the careful architecture of everything I had built beginning to crack and fall, and I understood that I had miscalculated, that I had moved 1 day too slowly, that tomorrow I would be gone, and Tara would still be wearing my crown, and the documents beneath the loose stone would be found eventually and used as evidence of exactly what she had accused me of. 3 seconds. I gave myself 3 seconds to feel it. Then I started moving. I did not go to my room. I went to Aldrich's chamber and knocked twice, the pattern we had agreed upon. He opened the door in 12 seconds, already dressed, already reading my face before I had spoken a word. "Tonight," I said. "It has to be tonight." He did not hesitate. "I will get Fenwick. Get Doran first." He went. I stood in the corridor and breathed and rebuilt the plan in my mind with the new information. Romeo has signed the exile order, which means by morning there will be guards at my door, which means we have until the palace wakes up to make this impossible to reverse. Not a day too slow, I corrected myself. 1 night exactly right. We moved through the palace in the last hours of dark, Doran ahead, Aldrich and Fenwick behind, Marta materializing from a corridor I hadn't seen her enter, because that was what she did, what she had always done, move through this palace like it was built around her instead of the other way around. The council chamber was empty. We laid the documents on the long table, and we waited. And when the first gray light came through the high windows, Doran sent word through the guard rotation. The Elder Council was required to assemble, immediately, before the king's business. Pack law, elder right, the one mechanism in this court that even Romeo's authority could not preempt without cause. I heard from across the palace the sound of a door opening, then another. Then Romeo's voice, sharp with irritation, asking what was happening. I straightened my dress. I lifted my chin. Now, I thought, now we find out what he is made of. The throne room filled faster than I had ever seen it. Word moved through a palace the way fire moved through dry wood, touching everything, stopping for nothing. By the time I walked through the great doors, the court was already assembled, already whispering, already arranged in the formation of people who could feel, without being told, that something irreversible was about to happen. Romeo stood before the throne, not seated, standing, and when his eyes found me across that room, something moved in them that I did not have time to name. Anger, perhaps, or something older, something that looked, from this distance, almost like fear. He had expected me to be gone. I was not gone. I walked to the center of the room. This assembly was not called by the crown, Romeo said. His voice carried the particular coldness of a man whose authority has been outmaneuvered and who has not yet decided how to respond to that. Explain yourself. The elder council called it, Lord Aldrich said from behind me, steady, immovable. Under Pack Law Article 7, a matter of evidence affecting the integrity of the throne. Romeo's jaw tightened. The exile order stands, whatever this is. The exile order, Fenwick said, was issued based on fabricated evidence. What we are about to present supersedes it. Elder right, my king, you cannot dismiss this assembly. The silence that followed was the most dangerous silence I had ever stood inside. Romeo looked at me. I looked back at him, and I did not blink, and I did not speak, and I did not give him anything to use. He was deciding, right there in front of 400 witnesses, in the space of 10 seconds, he was deciding whether to trust the woman who had shared his bed and stolen his judgment, or to allow the truth a hearing he could not control. My heart was perfectly still. Come on, I thought. Show me who you are. He stepped back from the throne. Not a concession. Not an apology. Just space. The space a man makes when he has decided, against every instinct his pride possesses, to listen. It was enough. I placed the documents on the floor between myself and the throne. Every letter, every forged signature, every date that proved the conspiracy had begun before Romeo had ever looked at me with those eyes that had stopped recognizing me. I did not raise my voice. She built it before you knew her name, I said. She commissioned the evidence. She manufactured the charges. Every reason you had to remove me was written by her hand and paid for with her gold. The exile order you signed last night was the last move in a game that began 4 weeks before my trial. She has been managing you, my lord, from the very beginning. I let that land. I watched it land. The silence was absolute. Tara rose. Her mouth opened, and for the first time in all the months I had watched her perform authority, nothing came out. The mask did not slip. It shattered. Right there in front of 400 witnesses, the face beneath the face was finally visible, frightened, exposed, and catastrophically ordinary. The court turned to Romeo. He held the forged documents in his hands, reading, and I watched his face do what I had never seen it do in 6 years of marriage. It broke. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting, just a slow, terrible fracturing around the eyes and jaw as the full architecture of what had been done, what he had allowed to be done, what he had signed his name to in the dark last night, became undeniable. His hands lowered. He looked at Tara. She tried, I will give her that. She tried one final time to reassemble the performance, the softness, the devotion, the face of a woman worth a crown. His expression did not move. "Remove her," he said. Quiet, final, the voice of a man burning something down. Tara made a sound I had not anticipated. Not rage, not a performance. A plea, raw and unpolished and completely human, stripped of every layer she had constructed. "Romeo, please, everything I did for us. You have to understand." "Remove her." Louder this time, the second time always harder than the first. The guards moved, and Tara, who had worn my crown, slept in my bed, drunk from my cups, stood in my hall and told me to straighten my back, was escorted from the throne room, still arguing, still performing, still unable to understand that the audience had already left. The doors closed behind her. The room exhaled. Then Romeo turned to me. I saw it before he spoke, the full weight of it, not guilt, which was too simple, but something that had no clean name. The look of a man who has held the documents in his own hands and traced the dates with his own fingers and understood, in the specific and unforgiving way that proof demands understanding, that he had put a chain on an innocent woman and handed her a tray and called it justice. He took a step toward me. "Helen." I held up my hand. He stopped. The entire court watched him stop, watched the most powerful alpha in the room go still at a single gesture from the woman he had chained. I did not do it for the court. I did it because I needed him to understand, in his body before his mind caught up, that something fundamental had changed. He did not get to cross that distance on his own timeline. Not today. "Not yet," I said. 2 words, quiet as a door closing. I turned from him, from those fractured eyes, from the words forming behind his teeth that I was not ready to receive, from 6 years of marriage being asked to account for itself in a single moment, and I walked to the throne. The crown sat on its ceremonial mount beside the seat, golden, familiar, still carrying the exact shape of my head after all these months, because it had only ever truly belonged there. I picked it up myself. The room held its breath. I placed it on my own head. Lord Aldrich went to one knee, then Fenwick, then Doran, then the guards, the council, the courtiers, one by one, then all at once. The throne room folded itself to the floor in a wave that moved from front to back, like something inevitable, like something that had always been coming and had simply been waiting for this moment to arrive. I looked forward, not at Romeo. Romeo had not knelt. He stood at the edge of the room, the exile papers still in his hands. The exile papers he had signed in the dark for a woman who had been building her throne on lies since before he knew her name. And his pride was doing the only thing pride can do when it has been completely and publicly dismantled. It stood very still. It said nothing. And that particular silence, that particular stillness, was the most honest thing he had offered me in months. I let him stand. That was its own verdict. Later, much later, when the palace had quieted to the sound of its own breathing, I stood on the balcony alone. The kingdom spread below me in the early dark, torches beginning to appear in windows, the city adjusting to the news the way cities always do, slowly, and then all at once. The crown was on my head, not restored, not returned, reclaimed. I thought of the chain, the tray, the cold stone floor of a servant's room, and the single candle I had read a forger's letter by. I thought of Marta's hand in the corridor, of Aldrich's nod in the cellar, of the exile papers Romeo had signed in the dark, and the look on his face when he understood what he had signed them for. Behind me, I heard footsteps stop at the balcony doorway. I did not turn around. Helen, his voice, raw in a way I had never heard it, the voice underneath the voice he showed the court. I let the silence hold for a long moment. Then, "You may speak." Not come in, not yes, not his name. You may speak, the precise language of a queen granting audience. I heard him understand it, the small shift of weight that meant the words had landed exactly where I intended them to. "I signed the exile order," he said. "Last night, before I knew, I know what you almost did." A long pause. "I am sorry, Helen. I know that is not enough. I know there is no version of enough for what I allowed. But I need you to know that Romeo." I said his name the way you stop something moving too fast. "I do not need you to explain yourself to me tonight. Tonight I need you to understand something." I turned then, looked at him in the doorway, this man who had lifted a crown from my head and placed a chain on my wrists and signed a paper in the dark that would have made me disappear, and I held his gaze with the steadiness of someone who had carried his mistress's meals through a hall where her own portrait watched her and never once looked away. "I built this without you," I said. "I found the proof without you. I called the council without you. I put this crown on my head without your permission and without your help, and without a single moment of your protection. I want you to hold that. I want it to be the first thing you think of every morning for a very long time." He said nothing. "Good." I turned back to the kingdom. "You will have opportunities," I said, "to demonstrate what your remorse is worth, whether it amounts to anything at all. But that begins tomorrow." The wind moved through the torches below. The city breathed. The crown on my head was exactly as heavy as it should be, heavy enough to mean something, light enough to wear without bowing. I had not won because I was stronger than Tara. I had won because she had believed, truly, completely, fatally believed, that making me invisible was the same as making me powerless. She had put a chain on a queen and handed her a tray and turned her back. And in the silence they gave me, I had learned every lock in the palace. This time I would be the one asking the questions.